Hello, and welcome to the second presentation in the tutorial series, Strategies for Success Supporting DeafPlus Learners. My name is Brenda Fawcett, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Alberta. I began my career at the British Columbia School for the Deaf in Burnaby, BC, where I taught deaf students who were diagnosed with additional disabilities such as autism, Down syndrome, and cerebral palsy. As a new teacher of DeafPlus students, I found visual schedules to be an extremely useful strategy and want to share some different ways of implementing them. Visual schedules are used to provide information to students. We can use visual schedules to provide information about the sequence of activities that will be happening across the day. This makes the day more predictable for students. We can represent activities in a variety of ways. Some students may require the use of real objects to represent activities. For example, a cup may be used to represent snack time. For some students, we may use photographs to represent activities. For example, we may show the student a photograph of a math workbook to represent math. There are also line drawing symbols that can be used to represent activities. Picture communication symbols, or PCS, are a brand of symbol. PCS are commonly used to support individuals who require visual schedules or other kinds of visual supports. BoardMaker is the software program used to access and create PCS-based materials. Information regarding PCS and the BoardMaker program can be found in the reference section for this tutorial. The BoardMaker program contains thousands of PCS that can be printed in black and white or color. These symbols can be used to represent activities in a visual schedule. You will see what PCS look like when we look at examples of visual schedules in a moment. For students who are able to read, text can be used to represent activities in the schedule. For this tutorial, we will be focused on the use of objects, photographs, and line drawing symbols for visual scheduling. In addition to using visual schedules to show a number of upcoming events or activities across the day, we can also use visual scheduling to support individuals in completing a single task. For example, we might use a visual schedule to show the steps involved in hand washing, doing an art project, or checking out books from the library. If you're working with a student who has not yet been exposed to a visual schedule or other types of visual supports, you will likely need to conduct a symbol assessment to determine the most appropriate type of symbol for him or her. Similarly, if you're working with a student who does have a visual schedule, but that schedule doesn't seem to be helping, you may need to do a symbol assessment. For example, I once worked with a kindergarten-age deaf student with autism. In the kindergarten classroom, the teacher was implementing a photograph-based visual schedule system that had been introduced while the student was in preschool. When observing the student in the kindergarten classroom, I noticed that he would engage in problem behaviors, such as screaming and falling to the floor, whenever there was a transition from one activity to another. In one instance, while this student was building with blocks, I saw his classroom aide show him the photograph of the playground and try to lead him out of the room for recess. The student screamed and cried, fell to the floor, and refused to leave the room. The classroom aide picked him up, walked down the hall, and outside. Once outside, the student was immediately happy. It was obvious that the student did not understand that the photograph of the playground meant recess. I then conducted a symbol assessment, and it was clear that the student best understood real objects. We then began using objects to represent activities in his daily schedule, and within weeks, he stopped engaging in problem behaviors during transitions. Over time, we taught him to use picture communication symbols, and eventually he used these for visual scheduling. This highlights the importance of using symbols that the student can understand. Because symbol assessment is outside the scope of these tutorials and requires some training, I will not be providing detailed information regarding how to conduct a symbol assessment. In the reference section for this tutorial, you will find a reference for information on conducting symbol assessments. If you need support with this, I recommend that you work with a speech-language pathologist or augmentative and alternative communication specialist. Before implementing a visual schedule with your student, you need to do some planning. At this point, you should have determined the appropriate type of symbol for the student. Now, you need to identify all of the activities that occur in the student's day. In school settings, it's best to look at the weekly schedule for the classroom as well as consider special events such as field trips and assemblies. Once you've made a list of all possible activities, you need to gather or create symbols that represent each of those activities. If your student requires real objects or tangible symbols, this may be more challenging. In the reference section for this tutorial, you will find resources that can help you with this. If your student will be using photographs, you will need to take good, clear pictures to represent activities. By good, clear pictures, I mean pictures with a solid background whenever possible, and pictures that show only the relevant item or items. For example, if you are taking a photograph of blocks, you want to make sure that only blocks are in the frame, not blocks and toy cars and crayons. If your student is using picture communication symbols, then you will need to use the BoardMaker software program to create your symbols. Laminating photos and line drawing symbols will go a long way in preserving your work. You will also need to consider how you will store and organize symbols. It's important to consider this up front so that you can easily locate symbols when creating a daily schedule. Small bins or boxes can be useful for organizing object cues. Photo albums can be used to store photographs for scheduling. Labeling and alphabetizing photos can make it way easier to locate specific photos when setting up a daily schedule. Index card boxes can also be used to store or organize photos or large picture communication symbols. If you are using 2-inch by 2-inch picture communication symbols, you can store them in plastic slide pages. You can purchase slide pages in the photography department of most department stores or photography stores. There are many ways to store and organize your symbols. It's important to develop a system that will work for you in your environment. Consider how you will represent when an activity is finished. If using objects, it's best to have a large bin or container where object cues for finished activities are placed. Photographs or picture communication symbols can either be turned over or placed in an envelope or baggie to represent that the activity has ended. Finally, consider how you will communicate any last-minute changes or cancellations to the schedule. For example, think about what you will do if gym is scheduled and then unexpectedly gym is canceled. You might communicate this to the student by drawing an X over the symbol with a dry erase pen. You will also need to replace the scheduled activity with something else. It's a good idea to have a few symbols of activities that the student enjoys set aside for just such an occasion. That way, if the student is upset by the cancellation of gym, for example, you can offer a couple of choices of preferred activities such as computer or art. There are a number of ways to set up a visual schedule system. To some degree, the way you set up a visual schedule system will depend on the type of symbol being used. Let's look at some of the ways of setting up schedule systems. Typically, when using an object cue system, objects are sequenced in boxes on a shelf or table, moving from left to right. It is important to give the student time to feel and/or look at the item before moving to the activity. How much time will depend on your student and his or her ability to process the information. If your student has a visual impairment, you will likely need to guide him or her to feel the item thoroughly before moving to the associated activity. Initially, students may not understand what each of the object cues represent. You will likely need to provide repeated exposures to the object cues and their associated activities over several days or even weeks. As a student completes an activity, the object cue for that activity should be placed in the finished box. Typically, this will be a large bin placed near the object cue schedule. After placing an object cue in the finished box, the student should then be directed to pick up the object cue for the next activity. This should be repeated until all of the activities have been completed. If students are using photographs or large picture communication symbols, you may choose to sequence them on the wall. You can affix the symbols to the wall using Velcro, or you can punch holes at the top of the symbols and hang them on hooks. Students can take the symbol for the current activity to the place where the activity occurs. When the activity is over, the symbol can be placed in a finished envelope. While this is an easy way to display a visual schedule for students needing photographs or large symbols, it is not very portable. While the student can take the symbol for the current activity to the representative location, the student may not always have access to the entire schedule. This can affect how well the student is able to understand information regarding upcoming events. For example, the student may be in the school gym. When gym class is over, it may be difficult to get the student to transition back to the classroom because he does not have his schedule with him and cannot see what is coming next. A photo album visual schedule may address this issue of portability. Small photo albums that hold 4 by 6 inch photos can be purchased for just a few dollars. The drawback to using these for scheduling is that students can only see the symbol for one activity at a time. This can make it difficult for them to anticipate upcoming events because they can't see the entire sequence. To address this issue, you can create or purchase photo albums that have an accordion fold. This allows students to see the entire sequence of events. With either option, the photo album can be placed in a fanny pack or backpack, making the schedule portable. As activities end, symbols can be turned over to represent finished. Another way to create a portable visual schedule system involves the use of binders. Binder-based systems work best when students are using smaller symbols sized about 2" by 2" or smaller. Symbols can be placed in plastic slide pocket pages. Slide pocket pages are 3-hole punched and can easily be inserted into a binder. This may be a preferable option for older students who may not want it to be obvious to their peers that they are using a visual schedule. As activities end, symbols can be turned over. Note, however, that it may be difficult for some students to manipulate symbols in and out of the slide pockets. Another way of setting up a binder schedule is to use Velcro. This makes it easier to manipulate the symbols. Velcro can be placed on the outside front cover of the binder and along the inside covers. The visual schedule can be placed on the outside front cover. The inside of the binder can be used to house extra symbols and for placement of symbols as activities end. The PortaCum system was developed by the mother of twin deaf daughters, both of whom were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. She developed the system to address issues related to portability, as well as issues related to her daughter's needs to sign. Her daughters had previously used binders, but it was difficult for them to hold their schedule systems and sign without dropping or losing their visual schedule. The PortaCum is worn around the student's waist and symbols attached with Velcro. When wearing the PortaCum, it is possible for the student to let go of the visual schedule and use his or her hands to sign. The PortaCum comes in a variety of sizes. It's best to involve the student in setting up the visual schedule for the day. This will help the student know what will be happening during the day. You can give the symbols to the student one by one for him to place in the schedule, or you can place all of the symbols on the table and tell the student what will happen first, second, third, etc. You can do this if the student understands sign language or speech. At every transition, guide the student to check his or her schedule. Students should remove the symbol for the completed activity and place it in the finished container or turn it over. Students should also refer to the schedule to see what the next activity is. Over time, you want to encourage students to do this on their own when the teacher tells the entire class that an activity is over. Make sure that you have a way to communicate unexpected changes in the schedule and have symbols of preferred activities that can replace canceled activities. Visual schedules can be a very effective tool for helping students understand upcoming events and addressing problem behavior associated with transitioning from one activity to another. Visual schedules can also help teach vocabulary, symbols, and time-related concepts. When adults refer to visual schedules while signing or talking about activities, students may learn new, relevant vocabulary. As well, if adults use time-related vocabulary such as now and later when referring to the visual schedule, students may learn the meanings of these concepts. In the reference section for this tutorial, you will find a number of resources that you can use to help you implement visual schedules with your students.